All right, I guess we'll get started. So today's lecture is going to continue with the databases. This time we're going to go through a specific example. We're going to use LibreOffice Bases is what I'm going to use going through my example. The example I'm going to do in class today is almost identical to the one in lab. It's a little bit less. There's a few less fields in a few of the tables, but for the most part, it's the same process, the exact same process that you'll be going through. And so the example that we're going to be covering is going to be a database to keep track of gifts. So there's going to be events and people and gifts, and you're trying to keep track of who you still have to write thank yous to. So the three tables: people, events, gifts. And then each of them is going to have a few fields. I cut the fields that are in the lab that I don't need for all of the technical parts of the example because they're identical to other things. So what I did is, you'll have to do quite a few different things for address. You'll have to separate that into like street address, city, state, all of that. I just did one address field because those are all text fields and none of them are linked to anything. So it's all the same. It's just going to be 4 of them instead of 1. And it was easier to make the slides with just 1. So the main fields are going to be, so every person is going to have a name and address. The reason you need the address, well, you need the name to know who gave you the gift and the address to know where to send the thank you note. The events, you'll need to know what you got the gift for, so they'll have a name and a date, just to keep track of what all the different events that you might have would be. For example, we'll only do 1 event, but doing more would be the exact same, just repeating the process. And then the last table, gifts, keep track of persons, so that's going to be a pointer to the people table. Keeping track of which person gave you the gift, the event, which points to the events table to tell you which event you received the gift for, and then thanks, which is just going to be a binary yes or no. Have I sent them a thank you yet? I just put the note in here in case some of you are like using the slides to go through along with the lab to help you do it. Don't copy exactly what I'm doing because I skipped some fields that you'll need. Okay. So most of the rest of the slides are really just going to be screenshots that I'll talk through. It's just going to be actually the creation process of the tables and linking them all together and creating the queries and the form reports. And so we start with opening LibreOffice. I used what I assume must be the most recent version because I downloaded it this morning, so 5.4. If you open it up and open up LibreOffice Bases, you'll end up in this interface, and so you just want to create a new database. Use the embedded one. Don't try to set up a server or anything. And then when you do that, you'll want to tell it not to register it. So on the next form page, when you submit, there will be an option that you have to change from yes register to no do not register. Do that, and then you can just continue on, and it'll put you in what will be the main interface page for creating it. If you want to follow along, you can. It might be a little bit fast to try to do it right now, but I don't know, you can try if you want. And so you'll get into this page, which is a little bit harder to see, but the option. So on the side here, you have 2 options. You have tables, queries, forms, and reports. And so we're going to go through each of those things. You start by creating your tables. We're going to skip over queries, come back to it, and make some forms, which will be, we talked about, that's how you're going to submit data and add data to your database. That's some queries to pull specific data out. And then a report, which is just going to generate like a PDF report of the results that came back from the query. And so we're going to start with go to table, create new table. That's just the first option. It's in design view. And so you'll end up in a window that looks like, it's going to look like that. Okay. And so you'll fill in the fields that you want to have. So I will warn you now, I did one thing wrong. I didn't put an ID field here because I wanted to show you that it'll give you a pop-up. But you want ID, name, which the field type for name is going to be text. And then, just a description of what it is. Name and address are pretty straightforward. You can imagine like big databases with 50 columns where you actually need to clarify what something meant. For instance, I clarified that this is the person's full address, but in your homeworks, it's just going to be their street address, and then you'll put like the city and state separately. And so then you'll need, once you've added that, you just need to, depending on which one you're clicked on, it'll have the arrow indicator. You pick all the settings for it. So in this case, I changed, the most important thing to change is entry required to yes for both of these, because we don't want anybody to be added to our database when we don't have their name or their address, because we need both of those things. Otherwise, we might as well not know it, because if we don't know, I mean, because we'd probably know the people for certain events, we could probably figure out their name from their address, but you want both. And in a large business, you wouldn't necessarily be able to determine the name and the address. So that'll be that, and then you want to save it. In this instance, we're looking at creating the people table, which is what we're going to call it. So just save that as people. When I do that, I get an error. And so the error will come up in a second. It's going to tell me that I didn't put a primary key, which is what I was just talking about. I'll need an ID thing. And so if you look through this, it needs a unique index, which is what I talked about before. They usually want to have those like just numbers. They're just auto-incrementing IDs to point to each row. And so I hit yes. I wanted to create a new key now. And it put in this ID field here for me. So I have a new field called ID. And it's typed as an integer. And the thing that you want to set down here for this is auto value yes. That means whenever somebody is creating one of these from a form, you don't have to put like a new ID value on the form. They don't have to fill that in. The database will just look in and see what kind of like the next available number is, and that'll be their ID number. Because the whole point of doing something through this is you won't even have to look at the IDs. You don't have to know what they are. The system itself will use once you've built it, so we'll use the IDs and show how they tie together. Once you've built it and built the forms, it'll keep track of how they all point to each other internally. So then once you're finished that's the full people table. And so I'll just give snapshots of the events and gifts table, and then we'll move on to how they all get connected together. So this, for instance, is the events table. It's pretty much the same thing. So I won't spend too much time on it. You've got the ID field. It's an integer. The integer, it's not selected, but it's auto-incrementing, and when and description are both required. The only real significant change is that the field type for when is actually a date time rather than text. Because again, if you make it text, there could be an error with entry. They could type something in that doesn't work. Whereas if you make this date time, when you ask them to enter it on a form, the form will check and make sure that it's actually a date time, that it's valid, that it can understand what date time that is. That way it'll correct them before it ends up in there and doesn't work. So that's the events table, and then the other one that has a little bit of interesting things in it is going to be the gifts table. So the big thing with the gifts table is that it's going to have 2 foreign keys, which we're going to be working on setting up in just a minute. So it has the same things as the other one. You just look at the ID, the description, and the thank. These are kind of similar. The ID is just unique ID for this table. Description is just text. In this case, thank, as I said a little bit earlier, is going to be a yes or no. So that's just because you don't need anything more than that. You could put text and use the words yes or no. And you could put an integer and do like 0 or 1. People only have 2 options. You can't enter something wrong that way, so it's nice to do it that way. The other thing that's interesting here that's different is the person ID and event ID. Now we're going to do something with that in just a minute, but those are going to be how we know which row from the person table is the person who gave us the gift, and which row from the event table is the event that the gift was for. And so this doesn't know that yet. We're just calling them that. And so what we're going to do to tell it that internally is we're going to go to Tools and then Relationships. And that's going to open. And so we're defining the relationships between our tables. So we created them. Now we have to define the relationships between them. And so the first thing to do is you have to go. It'll give you this menu, and you have to, because it doesn't have how many tables you might have. It doesn't want to just pop them all in there. You have to manually click on it, click add, click on it, click add. And so you're going to add all of the ones that you need. In this case, it's going to be all of them because we have relationships between all the tables, but it's possible that you'd have a database related to others, and so you wouldn't need to put them all in there. So the next step, trying to define the relationships. So this person ID, we want to be related to this ID here. So it makes it nice and easy for you. You click on this and you drag it over and you drop it on top, on top of the ID that it goes to. And then you click event ID and you drag it, you drop it over top of the ID column, the ID field of the events table. And that's actually all you have to do to set up. Now it knows that those IDs have to point to that other table. It makes it nice and easy to set that up for you. It was important the types match, but as I said before, we already defined the IDs were integers and the things that pointed to them were integers. So since they have the same type, you can do that. And so now what we'll need to do is create a form. So you'll close that window and go back to the forms window, which you'll just do on the side here. You just click forms, and then you use the window to create a form. And forms aren't much more complicated to make, and so it'll bring you in. You'll start with making a form for the people table, and so it'll give you a drop down at the top, and you select the table. You select the people table, and then you can use these arrows. You click on something over here. I think you've probably seen it before. And you click one of these arrows to move it to the other side, and you get all the fields that you want to use on the right. And then you're going to go down to arranging the controls. This is just going to pick how the form that is displayed to the user. So for the lab, you're going to want to pick these two. It's not critical, but that's what the lab instructions say, and so that's what we'll be expecting. And so then you're going to have to enter in some data. So in this instance, I don't have a screenshot of the first one. The second person who I entered in was Prince Philip, and I gave the address for Buckingham Palace. So the first one is the Queen. So those are the two people in my database. And so you just enter, it'll give you these two fields, and you just enter those in, and those rows are now in your database. So once you hit finish on the create form thing, it'll pop up that screen that I just showed you. You type in the people that you wanted, and then you hit enter, and it'll enter them in. If you ever want to get back to it, I don't have the thing open, so I can't show you. But on the main page, if you go to the Forms tab again, there will be a place to click on that form that you've created. Like, you can always open it up again. It's just that I, in this instance, have closed it because I entered both people that I intend to have, because for the lab, you only really need to create 2 people and 1 event and 1 gift from each person. And so now we're going to create a little bit more complicated of a form. We're going to want to create a form for events. So that I've skipped the first couple of steps. The first couple of steps are the same as for the like in the field selection. So I clicked, under field selection, I picked the events table, and then I picked all the fields from events except ID, like I did before. Except this time I'm actually going to do this set up a subform menu. Do a subform based on the existing relation, and you want to do the relation with gifts. That's going to tie the gifts ID, which points to the event. You're gonna have a subform so that when you create the event, you have the option to create every single one of the gifts from that event all in the same form, rather than having to open up a form and enter each gift on its own. And you'll see what the interface for that looks like in a minute. Let's see. Yes. So this first, before you do that, it'll give you'll have to pick which fields go in the subform. And so in this instance, we want to put the bank in the description there. We don't need to put all these IDs on there because we're going to do something later to keep track of those internally. We don't want the person that's dealing with the form to have to keep entering those. Again, we'll do the same thing with arranging the controls. The form, the way that it's laid out, we'll use the same layout that we used last time. That's just going to be big. And then we're going to come down, and this time, instead of just clicking finish like we did before, we come all the way to the last thing, and we click to modify the form, because we want to change the way it looks. And so that's going to bring up a menu where we can kind of see the layout and pick what we want to do. I'll just go up just a second here. So it's got like the date field for when, and it's got the description. This is like the main thing, and then this is our subform. So we're going to right-click on whether or not we thank them, and we're going to pick to create a list box. Now this is fully described in the lab. I want to point out, because I know I'm going too fast to note for sure, but the slides, you'll be able to go back through the slides. There will be a recording that you can watch on YouTube that'll have my voiceover on the slides, and the lab itself. I'm in these slides. I'm following the exact steps of the lab. In fact, I didn't know how to do this before I did the lab this morning. So you're going to want to pick column. This is going to let you create a new column here, and it's going to bring up the column menu. And so this is where we're going to deal with those IDs that were kind of hidden before. What we're going to do in here is we're going to call this column person. So that'll be what we enter in the general field here. We change this to person so that when somebody is filling out this form, it's going to say person on top of this new column that we've created in the form. And then we've got to pick what's going to be in there, and this is what gets complicated. So we use the person ID as the data that's going to be used there. So that is grabbed from the table, and then we're requiring it from here. But then we're making like our own custom column here. And the way that we're doing it is we're including I talked a little bit before about queries. We've entered in the SQL query for select name and ID from the table people. And so we're having a column of people, and we want to select every single person from the table of people. And so that way, when somebody actually goes to fill in this form, they're going to have, and it'll come back to the original page. But remember how there was the gray box at the bottom that was kind of blank before? So now it's going to have one row in it for every person in our database. In this case, we've got Elizabeth and Prince Philip. And then you can fill in, so this is where you fill in all the gifts. So you filled in like the information of what the event is up here. It's too small to read, but I gave the Jubilee pageant on the Thames in 2012 and Elizabeth and Prince Philip. And I marked that their gifts were Bermuda and the British Arctic Territory, so very generous. And I thanked Queen Elizabeth for Bermuda, but I have not yet thanked Prince Philip for the British Arctic Territory. So that's just the filling information. You'll say something more reasonable, I hope. But I entered them in because I wanted to think of people's whose actual address that I could give without giving away anybody's private information. And then I finished the lab and realized there were gifts, and so I had to figure something out for them to give me. But anyway.
Wait, I have a question.
Okay.
Why is the LibreOffice in Chinese?
I don't know.
Because I was wondering. I don't read.
Yeah, I don't know why that's being appended there. I suspect it detected that that's a language that's installed on my computer, but it's not like the language that's set to display, so I think that must just be an error.
Oh, okay. So it won't be in.
Well, it'll certainly also be in English if
Okay.
your computer is set to have English as its primary language.
Okay.
It just picked Chinese because Chinese is like a secondary language on the computer that I was using.
Oh.
So I don't know why it did that. It shouldn't have, but it did. But English is what it should display. So then one of the next thing we're gonna look at doing is we're gonna want to use, so they have a nicer way to create queries. I know that I had to do that query before, the select query. I had to type it in manually, just like I showed you on Tuesday's lecture. But they actually do have a nicer interface for generating queries of the database through here, as long as you're doing like it through the queries menu. So we'll go into that. You can, right here, you kind of, the first step is field selection. And so you can go through all the tables. You can use this drop down to different tables. And then you can shift over whatever values you want from each table. And so I happen to choose the name and address fields from the people table, and the thank and description fields from the gifts table. And so basically, every query that I have, that's the information that's going to be there. And then so I also talked about sorting order. I talked about like all the different clauses you could run, like sort by, group by, and filter and all that, and like filtering stuff and all that. So that's all like options and steps along here now. So you can do things like search conditions and other things. Not that we actually need to in this case. So we're just going to finish and go to the next step, which will be kind of finishing up the query's information. So we have to, for some reason, and you don't have to do this in Access, but it doesn't remember, and so you have to tell it again. These two things go together. This person ID goes to this ID. Then you do it again just by clicking on this and dragging it over on top of that, and it creates this linkage. And then the one other thing that you'll have to change on this form is it starts where you're just selecting all of those things. But what we actually want to do is we only want to grab the thank column here from gifts if it's 0. So that's saying we only want to grab things. We want to grab all of these entries, but we only, instead of like just displaying all the information, actually only show us the ones where this value is 0. So we have not thanked them. And so when you run that query, there were the 2 gifts that I showed on the table before when I created the event, but only one of them is going to show up when I run this query because only one of them was unthanked, and so only the one shows up. And so the next step is going to be creating a report. So I'm going to get through this a lot faster than I thought I would. And so I'll be able to take questions as much as you need and go back through, because this is almost the end of what you will have to do for the lab. So what you're going to do, once you close that, it'll take you back to the report page. So you can just select reports here, use the wizard to create a report. So that'll let you pick what fields you're going to want to include in the report. So your report is going to be based on a query. In this case, the query we just made. So your report, we're going to select the query that you want, or you could select an individual table, but in this case, we're going to select the query. And the things that we want are name, address, and description. So that's going to be the name of the person we have to thank, their address, and the description of the gift they gave us. Because remember, we've already filtered out people that we've already thanked. And so then the next step is going to be to use the choose layout right here. And we're going to, just because of the treatment in the lab, we're going to do in block labeled above. It's not critically important. It would look fine other ways, but that's the way that we're doing it for the report. And then you'll go to the last step, choose to modify the report layout. So you won't take the default of how they choose to put everything. When it gets a report, you get to pick where things go. So it's going to give you like a page header section, and then like a query result section, and then a page footer. And so these things only appear like once at the top of the page and once at the end. And in the middle, it's going to be the format that everything gets displayed in, which isn't showing up very well right now. But we've got description up top, so this is going to be the description of the gift, and then the name of the person who gave it, and their address. And so this is the format that we want. If there were more than one result, it would go like page header, and then results until the page was filled, and then the page footer. So you could generate a multi-page report with this if you had a lot of people that you're pulling from the database. But in this case, it's just one. And so once you like submit this, save it actually, then open the report. It's going to actually open the report in Google Writer for you, and you can use the same method that you've used in the past to just export that as a PDF, and that'll be the last document that you need for your submission. So you'll write up your report, and you'll include. I know you have to include the PDF of this, and I'm sure that there will be other files it says to include. And if there are any steps of this that are unclear, I can definitely go back through them. I'm happy to talk more about any of the things, but this is really what you'll need to know to be able to do the lab. And you can use Microsoft Access as well. The lab has instructions for Microsoft Access. These were just, in fact, these are actually considered the alternate instructions, but I didn't want to buy Microsoft Access just to teach this, so LibreOffice is very similar. But I'm happy if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I don't actually have anything else to go over. And I'll post these along with the recording.